Dang, my background music got really ominous right as I'm getting ready to go. No, I've typed the disclaimer that I put in chat, and I've made chat visible so that as we go through, we can chit chat about it. But I do want to make that disclaimer that whatever we're going to be seeing here is a statement. It's a ideological or a theological sentence. It's like what he said, and as anyone who's lived at all in the world should, I hope, know, what you say matters less than what you do. And whatever we go ahead and read here, the fact remains that across the world, the Catholic Church is still very much infringing upon women's rights. It is very much infringing upon the rights of LGBT individuals and the ability of LGBT individuals to live our lives. And in particular, in the United States, even in deeply liberal areas, very often transgender people cannot get the health care that they need to live because the only hospitals in the areas that they live in are run by the Catholic Church, which denies them health care. So we're going to be reading this lovely document today, and we're going to try to engage with it in good faith. As far as I can tell, Pope Leo seems to be a pretty decent individual, all things considered. But, well, he hasn't stopped the Catholic Church from doing some pretty nasty things that they continue doing. So, we'll take what he says with a grain of salt. That said, I don't know. If he is saying what the news articles that I'm seeing are saying that he's saying, I look forward to nodding along with a lot of this. Other contexts of importance. I am not a Catholic. I'm not a Christian. I am a religious person. I'm a spiritual person. That said, things like whether or not Jesus is the Son of God, how the hell am I supposed to know? That shit happened 2,000 years ago. I'm not going to make a statement on it. I will say, though, that in my observed experience, people who think that, Jesus is the Son of God and believing that makes them immune to the consequences of their actions are some of the most vile and horrid people you will ever meet. And so I will never identify as a Christian. I have had, as the old saying in the LGBT community goes, there ain't no hate like Christian love, and I don't want nothing to do with that. So, I wouldn't call myself a hostile person to Christianity in and of itself. Like, there was a period of my life where they were considering sending me to seminary. I do know my Bible quite well. I was raised in kind of a hybrid Methodist, Baptist, Episcopalian household. But still, I'm not a Christian, so I'm going to be coming at this from kind of an ex-Christian perspective throughout. I work in, prior to my disability at least, I was working in data and data workflows, which means that I have very, very strong opinions on these two words. And those opinions predispose me to probably, I think, agree with whatever's going to be read here, so we should probably keep that in the back of our minds, that I may be more sympathetic to what's written than maybe I should be, but that's just in our heads. We're still going to try and engage critically and in good faith with what Pope Leo the 14th wrote. By which, and to be clear what I mean by that, I mean, I'm going to attempt to understand the best implication of what he says. I'm not going to try and put words in his mouth. There's some vague ambiguity in what he's written. I'm going to try to read it in the way that is best for whatever he's trying to say. And I'm also going to try to be critical of it, because we don't benefit as a society to just accept things as face value, right? We kind of need to do both. And it's very easy to caricature something someone says and or writes and mock them, it's tougher to read it as it should be, as they're intending. I think it's going to be easier in this case because I really do not believe that Pope Leo is the sort of person who's going to be reasoning or writing in bad faith. So I don't think we're going to have too much to worry about here, but we will still try to keep those frames in mind. Yeah. So let's go ahead and begin to read the first encyclical of His Holiness Pope Leo XIV, Magnifica Humanitas, on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. And already I have a minor critical. Like, yay, I like the idea of protecting humanity from artificial intelligence, but this phrase of safeguarding the human person raises concerns to me about those very material harms that the Catholic Church does across the world, because a lot of their violations of women's autonomy and the subjugation of women have to do with this concept of safeguarding the human person in sort of this view of a woman first and foremost being a machine to make more babies rather than an individual in and of herself. And sort of a similar thing in the LGBT community, the idea that in some sense we are harming humanity by existing. So I've seen these phrases used, this phrase in particular used by people to do harm, so it's a little of a red flag. But again, I don't think that it's intended to. I think in this particular context, without having read anything yet, and we shouldn't be making assumptions without reading it, that he's probably just kind of more concerned about work and life and creativity than anything else. Let me know if the background music I've chosen is too loud. I've chosen the soundtrack to Final Fantasy V because it is long and quite good. Alright. I'm not going to read all of this. This is just the table of contents. It's long, but it's not as, it doesn't look like it's nearly as long as Transrad Femme, and we've read Transrad Femme on stream, so. Introduction. Humanity. Well, can I make this a little bit bigger? Hey! Let's go like this. We're reading Pope. Goes pretty okay. We're gonna read some Pope. Yay. I am... Dear Vatican, your website does not scale very well. See if I can remember. That's not it. Remember the thing that Cassie found. Here it is. Style editor. Goodness gracious. I am mad at the Vatican now. This is a terrible... Ooh. We're not going to try to fix this CSS. That is not very nice, consistent, good CSS. Yeah, I mean, Pope Leo is fine. As my pin thing says, the Catholic Church is still materially harmful to women and LGBT people. But we're going to read what he said. This is his first encyclical, and it sounds like it's pretty good. So we're going to just read what he has to say. Humanity, created by God in all its grandeur, is today facing a pivotal choice, either to construct a new Tower of Babel or build the city in which God and humanity dwell together. People are messaging me. Rawr. I'm going to tell them to get in here so they stop messaging me, and then I'm going to go on Do Not Disturb. There. Go away. Okay. So, So this is a hell of an opening. We're facing a pivotal choice to construct a new Tower of Babel or build the city in which God and humanity dwell together. Each generation inherits the task of shaping its own era, of guiding history to become a place where the dignity of every person is safeguarded, justice is promoted, and fraternity is made possible. Yet every era also runs the risk of creating an inhumane and more unjust world. Whenever humanity is in danger of marring its true identity, we Christians lift our eyes to the incarnate God, knowing that it is only in the mystery of the Word made flesh that the mystery of humanity truly becomes clear. In Jesus Christ, this humanity and its grandeur becomes the way, truth, and life, opening the path for each of us to grow to fullness. So let's see. I am all along here cheering until this point. And then I'm just like, what is this true identity, huh? Because I've had people claim I'm abandoning my true identity by embracing myself. Um, and then here already we're seeing the thing I mentioned earlier. The reason I'm not a Christian ultimately is this sort of idea that leads to, in practice, a bunch of people abdicating right action for something. Yeah, it's religious stuff. But if we're willing to just kind of take a breath and step back and go, yeah, he's Pope, it's all going to be in that frame. This seems like he's opening this entire thing with a big, glaring, hi, we have a problem. Yes, he has these citations all over the bottom. So if we click here, Second Vatican Ecumenical Council Pastoral Consultation of 1966. Oh yeah, no, this is great. You weren't here yet. Sahil, when also, the Pope has a humanities degree. Like, a lot of these people have humanities degrees. That's it. Don't look at the CSS on this website. There was some issues in the, as I'm zooming in, I noticed issues, and I'm like, oh, well, this is an easy CSS fix. And then I looked at their CSS, and I went, I just closed it. The CSS on this page is horrifying. It's some very, 2002 CSS. Like, they have it looks like they have every div named, and they have different CSS for every div. But yeah. Founded on Christ, the living stone, we experience the powerful and mysterious action of the Holy Spirit, and we believe that every authentic human effort to cooperate with Him for the good will be blessed by our Heavenly Father, in whom we place our hope. I don't quite remember. I think that's a Catholic thing. Let's take a look. Let's actually we can look. Christ the living stone. What the heck is that, actually? Apparently it's not just okay. Oh, it's a reference to Isaiah. Okay. Okay. Now I understand. Okay, yeah. It's not important. That's the end of it. It's not important. There's in the Old Testament in the Jewish Bible, in Isaiah, there's a prophecy about a stone getting laid in Zion that will have the truth written on it. And I had forgotten that in Christianity they say that the stone is alive and it's Jesus, and Jesus speaks the truth. That's all that is. It's a Christianity phrase. I had forgotten it. It's a silly one. But yeah, we believe every authentic human effort to cooperate with God for the good will be blessed by our Heavenly Father, in whom we place our hope. For this reason, we can diligently contribute to every initiative that builds a more just world, and we can call others to collaborate in promoting the integral development of every human being. We wish to engage in dialogue with all men and women of our time, with whom we share in the events, questions, and aspirations of humanity. Together with them, we seek to identify new paths for the common good and for promoting a dignified life for all. Indeed, openness to dialogue is an integral part of the Church's vocation, because, constituting Christ as sacrament of communion with God and unity of the entire human race, she recognizes history as the place where the gospel challenges and affects human existence. Who is she? The Church. The Church. That's right. The Church is she. Okay. It took me a moment to be like, she? Who is she? The Church. Okay. The Church's vocation in particular. What is that? That is that is 65 again. Yeah, the church is Christ, the church is God's wife. Something like that. I'm not a Catholic and I don't have good Catholics, so I'm sure there's some detail about that I don't understand, but yeah. We can we may not be able to force from the church, but we could force from the clergy. We're being mean when we said we weren't going to be. We said we weren't going to be mean. I said I wasn't going to be mean, and we're already being mean. Sahil, you're a terrible influence. I love you. In this spirit, Pope Leo the 13th published his encyclical Rerum Novarum, which we could read. It's linked right here. On capital and labor. On capital and labor. Yeah, we do, but also I kind of want to hold on that because hashtag woke Pope in 1891. I want to hold on. Well, I don't want to be too mean, because I read some discourse arguing about whether or not this encyclical is repealing the doctrine of discovery, which Cassie hadn't ever heard of. You might have heard of. It's the theological justification for all of the bullshit that Christians and Catholics did against our respective ancestors. The different flavors of Indians on the different sides of the Atlantic. So, I don't want to be too mean, because if it turns out he did in fact repeal that, hey! But yes. We're being nice. We're being nice. We're reading what he said in as best as we can. But we do want to be critical. We do want to be critical. So don't let me be too nice. But yeah. In this spirit, Pope Leo the 13th published his encyclical Rerum Novarum in 1891, the 135th anniversary of which we celebrate with deep gratitude this year. We're not reading that right now. We're going to trust what Pope Leo the 14th says. With that document, my beloved predecessor gave impetus to the reflection on society, economy, and politics, which is now known as the social doctrine of the Church. When some objected that the Church should not waste energy on worldly matters, but instead focus on communicating the message of eternal life, Leo the 13th responded with realism and wisdom, saying that the proclamation of the gospel cannot overlook the concrete lives of people. No, you go ahead and keep the awful jokes. I'm just not always gonna read them. I'm gonna let them flow, and then we'll stop and read them. My beloved predecessor. Hashtag my predecessor. I mean, literally, he chose the name Leo the 14th in honor of this guy. Like, that's not even a joke. That's just literally what happened. But good on Leo the 13th going, the gospel can't overlook fucking material reality. Please, Leo the 14th, look at the material reality of the harm that your church is doing to transgender people around the world, and stop. But yeah, don't leave. Don't leave. We like your awful jokes. Many decades have passed since then, and the magisterium, pastors, and theologians and faithful have continued to reflect on social issues in light of the gospel. Today, the second doctrine of the Church is a legacy of wisdom, where we find principles for thought, criteria for discernment and judgment, and concrete guidelines for action. Founded on sacred scripture and tradition. Yes, the magisterium is a real-life thing. It's not just in Anbanar. I'm pretty sure if we start page them, we can find them. Yeah. The Church's authority or office to give authentic interpretation of the Word of God. So it's not a place, it's a principle. It's not a council. It's the doctrinal authority of the Catholic Church. I probably would have known that if I were a Catholic. But again, I was raised Protestant, so we don't believe in that, actually. That's one of the differences between Protestantism and Catholicism, is the Protestants deny the magisterium. We don't even call it that. Founded on sacred scripture and tradition in its engagement with the sciences, it helps us clearly interpret the challenges of the present and identify appropriate ways for living out clear Christian witness with joy and in service to the world. It's not an inert set of concepts, but a living corpus of truth that safeguards and interprets humanity's vocation to a full and just life. I therefore wish to add my own voice to this living tradition, invoking the help of the Spirit of Wisdom, who has dwelt in the world since its beginning. That feels like a fuck you to J.D. Vance in particular. It is not an inert set of concepts, but a living corpus of truth that safeguards and interprets humanity's vocation to a full and just life. That feels like the Pope is taking out a little knife and jabbing it at, like, the fucking American conservative Catholics who are all, rah, don't change what happened. It also feels like he's warming up to tear down some old principles. Like, this is a line, and this is a line I don't expect to see if I'm gonna be seeing nonsense. So, the res novae of our time. While Leo XIII spoke in his time of new things, rerum novarum, today we cannot limit ourselves simply to repeating his insightful teachings. Instead, we must ask God for the wisdom to interpret the great trends of our time, particularly technological advances. In recent years, it's become increasingly evident how rapidly and profoundly digitalization, artificial intelligence, and robotics are transforming our world. Technology should not be considered in and of itself as a force antagonistic to humanity. On the contrary, it has formed part of our history since the beginning, as a profoundly human reality linked to the autonomy and freedom of man. Over the centuries, technological development has significantly improved the living conditions of humanity. At the same time, each phase of progress has also revealed the ambiguity of tools that can cause harm when not oriented toward the good. Today, however, we find ourselves facing a new situation. The power and prevalence of emerging technologies are interwoven into the fabric of daily life, shaping decision-making processes and deeply affecting the collective imagination. Never has humanity had such power over itself, saith Pope Francis in Laudato Si in 2015. Okay, that... I don't like that. That feels like he's taking Pope Francis out of context, but I don't want to go double check. I have to. Okay. Never has control over humanity had such power over itself. We must recognize that nuclear energy, biotechnology, information technology, knowledge of DNA, and other abilities have given us tremendous power. More precisely, they've given us the knowledge and economic resources to use them and impression dominance on the whole of humanity and the entire world. Never has humanity had such power over itself, yet nothing ensures it will be used wisely, particularly when we consider how it has currently being used. We need but think of nuclear bombs dropped in the middle of the 20th century, or the array of technology with Nazi. Okay. Okay. So it's not being taken out of context. And that is a much meaner statement than ooh. That's Pope Leo the 14th obliquely referring to AI in the same sort of frame of mind as nuclear weapons and Nazism. Fuck. Damn. So true. He's Catholic. We can't say damn. We have to say dang. Gosh darn. Ooh. New technologies open up a horizon, extending in directions that are imaginable, yet not fully predictable. This complicates the assessment of their potential impact and the long-term effects they have on the dignity of individuals and the common good. It now falls to us to face the challenges of our time with clarity of thought and responsibility. It is necessary to establish adequate regulatory tools capable of upholding justice and curbing the distorting effects of technological power. Nevertheless, the issue is not limited to regulation. As Pope Francis warned, we must realistically ask ourselves who holds this power today and how they use it. It must be recognized that nuclear energy, biotechnology, information technology, knowledge of our own DNA, and many other abilities we've acquired have given those with the knowledge and the economic resources to use them an impressive dominance over the whole of humanity and the entire world. Hey, we just read that when we were checking the last reference. In the past, it was largely up to the state to guide and direct innovation. Today, however, the main drivers of development are private, often transnational parties that are endowed with the resources and capacity to intervene that surpass those of many governments. Technological power thus takes on an unprecedented, predominantly private aspect, which makes it even more challenging to discern, govern, and direct such power toward the common good. I'm not going to say that the Pope just said nationalize the companies, but one could use the Pope's statement to justify nationalizing the companies. My criticism of the Pope is that he does not therefore say, break up the corporations and nationalize the companies. For this reason, it is necessary to begin a shared discernment of processes for identifying the spiritual and cultural roots of ongoing transformations. If we focus only on contingencies, we risk letting the succession of emergencies dictate the direction of our path. We are living through a rapid phase of transition, a change of era, in which, while some are vying for the future of new technologies and others dedicate themselves to reflecting on the matter, I got a message. I got your message. I haven't opened it. I'll open it after. A change of era, which, while some are vying for the future of new technologies and others dedicate themselves to reflecting on the matter, most people are watching and waiting, observing from afar and merely hoping for the best. For this reason, crucial questions impose themselves on our conscience and can no longer be avoided. Where are we going? Toward what goal do we wish to orient ourselves? To what direction should we choose as a people and as a human community? I have a feeling that we're going to agree on the problems, but this question, toward what goal do we orient ourselves, is going to be something that we disagree with them on. I'm going to say that my thought is I want something resembling a preservation of the natural world balanced with maximal human freedom over ourselves. You know, that the Wiccans have that little saying, "On it hurt and undo what you will." And I think that, you know, that's not a bad little thing. As long as you're not hurting yourself, or excuse me, as long as you're not hurting others or the world or nature, you should have maximal freedom to do what you will and be who you are, and let the shining light of the divine spark in the center of all living things shine through your actions and embodiment. And I think that that same sort of thing might. I think we're going to be running line and line up until we hit that little bit of we're not Christians, and therefore our conception of what the divine spark is very foundationally different. But yeah, you have no idea how much I want to open that little thing you sent me that I'm not supposed to till after stream. You have no idea. Because you've told me not to, I want to open it. I'm so oppositionally defiant. 2 biblical images. In order to answer these questions and discern... Okay, I appreciate that he's going to answer his own questions right away and not leave them vague. I appreciate that. So we get to see where he wants to go and where that differs from where we want to go. In order to answer these questions and discern how to navigate responsibly the era of AI, I would like to bring to mind 2 scenes from the Bible: the construction of the Tower of Babel and the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. The story of Babel appears in the book of Genesis at the origins of humanity, immediately after the genealogies of Noah's sons. After settling in the plain to the land of Shinar, the people decided to build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. Hey, Hawk! We're reading what the Pope wrote. Hawk, are you Catholic? I hope that we have a Catholic here who can yell at me if I'm too anti-Catholic. Because I'm not actually a Catholic. My Christian background is Protestant, so... We've already run into 2 technical moments where we had to stop and look up something Catholic. But yeah, after settling in a plain in the land of Shinar... Is Shinar a real place? It is! Ayo! This is Shinar. This part of Iraq. Down here. So, like, the southern part of Iraq in the Mesopotamia. That's Shinar. Yeah, it's very possible. Yeah. The people decided to build a city and tower with its top in the heavens. Fearing being scattered across the earth, they sought to guarantee stability and power for themselves, and above all, to make a name for themselves. It was an impressive feat: a single language, a single technology, and a single direction. A lot of people make biblical allusions. I'll make biblical allusions sometimes. There's parts of the Bible that are fun to make biblical allusions for. Like, if I go off, sometimes when I go off on anti-capitalist rants, I'll start screaming about being cultists of mammon, and that's a biblical allusion. That's an allusion to a conflict between the Jewish people and followers of a pre-Canaanite god of wealth. You should. Oh my gosh. I should too. Maybe we should make this read random stuff on stream a more regular thing, and we should pick something that we are more likely to agree with and read it. We could be equal opportunity offenders and make fun of our own religion. That would make everyone mad. But no, we're not making fun of him. We're pointing out, hey, we're trying not to make fun of him. We did make fun of him a little earlier. I'm sorry, Pope Leo. You can take it. You're in charge of the entire Catholic Church. I am but a disabled and in constant pain transsexual in Maryland. However, the project concealed a profound danger. It was a project conceived without reference to God, supported by a uniformity that eliminated diversity and chose homogenization over communion. I'm sorry, I have to stop again. That's a fucking sentence. Yeah. Damn. I love that. I love that. So one of the things that's been bugging me about my professional career over the last since about 2022. Um, YubTub, I am listening. I'm using you as background music. Grr. Is that everyone wants to have everything become very homogenized. Which, on the one hand, it makes sense, right? If you're doing everything the same way and you're following the same boilerplates, then you can kind of plug in things very easily. It makes it very easy to maintain and update and so on and so forth from technology. But a lot of that ends up reflecting back in the culture of the companies too. Like, even before the anti-DEI stuff really started burning out, you started to see fewer and fewer queer people. You started to see fewer and fewer black people, and just more and more, and even fewer and fewer like right-wing white people. Like, you've just kind of, everyone started to be kind of the same sort of bog standard sort of person that's very consistent with kind of the liberal upper class white slash North Indian immigrant sort of population. I know that Sahil knows who I'm talking about because she's grown up around that, but the people who kind of will say things like, we love acceptance and we love this and we love that, while like shutting down poor people and paying to get homeless people shoved off to another city. And I feel like this is a nag in particular at that. Since this Pope is from Chicago, there's no way in hell that this Pope has lived as long as he has without seeing that. And I can't help but feel that he's got that sort of nag, but maybe that's just me projecting. But in either case, I do like that sentence. That is such a good sentence. When a city is built on pride and the claim to self-sufficiency, communications breaks down, languages are confused, and people no longer understand each other. The result is not unity, but dispersion. Babel thus reveals the limits of any effort that, however grandiose, arises from self-affirmation, sacrifices human dignity for efficiency, and aspires to reach heaven without God's blessing. Oh, I am absolutely sure he has, yeah. This is an interesting bit, too. So this is not as interesting, like, in a broad sense, but, like, having grown up in a Protestant household, this is an assertion that the actions that Babel was taking lead to the consequences by nature and not through an unnatural intervention by God, which runs counter to what I learned in Bible school as a Protestant. So, for Sahil's sake, because she is not Christian, I don't know if she's heard the story of the Tower of Babel. They build the tower up to the sky. God punishes for their hubris by striking down the tower and making each and every person involved in its construction speak a different language, so that no one can understand each other anymore. It's kind of traditionally the biblical origin to the diversity of human language, as a punishment on humanity for trying to transcend God. Okay. I know people have heard of it, but I just want to make sure it's stated. It says, I like that this alternative representation here, that this, like, when you build a city on pride and claim self-sufficiency, Communication breaks down, language becomes confused, and people stop understanding each other. Because it's so freaking true. If you've ever worked in those sorts of environments where everyone's like trying to be completely self-sufficient, even if they're all still speaking English, it's different. No one understands each other anymore. That's so true. You need to talk to other people. I hate, parentheses, adore. You know, God, I hate how much I'm agreeing with the Pope. I hope you hear the joy in my voice. That's an example of a communication breaking down. I think my chat understands what I mean when I say, oh, I hate how much I'm agreeing with the Pope. But I think the Pope would not, or Pope Leo might understand what I mean. But I think prior popes might not have been like, what do you mean you hate the Pope? But do you know what I mean? Pope. Pope is spit. Woke DEI Pope here is spitting bars. In the book of Nehemiah, in turn, opens at a time of great vulnerability in the history of ancient Israel. After the Babylonian exile, a portion of those people returned to Jerusalem, but the city was still in ruins, the walls collapsed, and the gates burned. Nehemiah, a Jew in the service of the Persian king Artaxerxes, received news of the disastrous state of his ancestral city. God, I love the story of Nehemiah. I'm actually going to say, if you haven't read the book of Nehemiah, you should. It is Bible, so it's got kind of the Bible tone that can be a little tough to read. Woo! Hi, Lime. Schism. Lime, are you a Catholic? Do we have our Catholic in chat who can yell at me if I'm getting Catholicism wrong? Because right now we've got me, an ex-Protestant, Malakik, who I think is an atheist, Sahil, who is a Hindu Jain, and Hawk, who is not a Catholic, but whose mom is. So we have our Catholic! Yay! I thought you're not. I thought you were like. Or just your dad is. Okay. I thought that. Well, I'm not going to say too much. It's you. You say okay. See, I grew up in a high church Protestant household, so I still did the kneeling and sitting and standing, and I very much appreciate ritualism in my life. Which is why last year I ended up doing um, more Diwali than Sahil did, even though I'm not the Hindu, because I just like the ritual. And it's good to take that time as darkness descends to meditate on the coming of the light. But yeah. Oh, I don't like the nun coming to slap you. That I don't like. Rituals should be actions to place you into the appropriate mindset for communion with the greater divinity that unifies all. But Presbyterians. Ah. Yeah, yeah. But no, let's get back. But yeah, as I was saying, if you haven't read Nehemiah, you should. It's a really fun story. So yeah, insurgent King Artaxerxes had received news of the disastrous state of his city. Before taking action, he fasted, prayed, and interceded for the people, then asked the king for permission to return to Jerusalem, and on arriving, examined the destroyed areas in silence. He did not impose solutions from above. He convened the families, assigned each of them a section of the wall to rebuild, and listened to their concerns, coordinated their efforts, and addressed any opposition. The narrative shows how a city is reborn, not through the initiative of one, but through the shared responsibility of all. Men, women, priests, artisans, heads of households, and young people all play a part. It's an undertaking with God at the center, which rebuilds relationships before rebuilding with stones. Thus, ancient Jerusalem rediscovered a common language, not one of uniformity, but one of communion, namely the harmony that arises when all persons assume their own role and recognize that their strength comes from the Lord. Yay! Yeah. Yeah, that said, I'll point to my pinned pope because we like materialism in this chat. The Catholic Church is still materially involved in the persecution of women around the world and in harms perpetrated against the LGBTQ community and the trans community in particular, especially through the Catholic hospitals in the United States. Rah, please address that. Please address that, Pope. But no, I'm liking what I'm reading so far. I'm liking this encyclical. He's pretty good. I'm very much liking this contrast, right? This idea of pride and uniformity. There, ooh, okay, yeah. I was not going to comment on it because I don't want it to be that sort of stream. But when you said Jesuits, I flinched a little because Native American. I'm like, ugh. I remember some of the elders talking bad about the Jesuits. We're going in the right direction, rar. Ah, I see. Well, I am Native and ex-Christian. A syncretic Hindu Muslim myself. But that's not why we're here. We're not here to argue religion. We're here to read Pope Leo's encyclical and see what he has to say. And try to see what holes we feel there are in there, what we are concerned that he's not addressing, and what we're glad to see. In light of these two images, the Holy Spirit challenges us today regarding our relationship with technology and the ongoing digital revolution. Scientific discoveries are talents entrusted to humanity so that they may bear fruit. Technology has the power to heal, connect, educate, and protect our common home, but it can also divide, exclude, and generate new forms of injustice. In the abstract, technology in and of itself is not a solution to humanity's problems, just as it is not inherently evil. In practice, however, technology is never neutral, because it takes on the characteristics of those who devise, finance, regulate, and use it. Therefore, the primary choice is not between yes or no to technology, but between constructing Babel or rebuilding Jerusalem, between a power that claims to dominate the heavens and a people who work together in the presence of God to rebuild the walls of fraternal coexistence. I'm picking up on my first major criticism of this encyclical. I think that the Pope is taking as a granted that AI works the way AI's proponents say it works. And as someone who works in the industry from which AI has grown, it doesn't. Like, the people who just call it a series of Markov chains are oversimplifying a complicated technology, but it does not do what the AI proponents say it does. So I think you can actually say no to LLMs. I think we are allowed to say no to LLMs. Machine learning writ large, right? Pattern recognition technologies are very good. They do a lot of positive things. Black box optimizations that arise more to black box optimization algorithms are very good for developing ways to automatically address situations that are too complicated to properly study, but you still need to, like, handle. But yeah, it does seem more like a hypothetical response to a hypothetical AGI, which is what AI proponents propose. I have doubts that AGI can actually exist. Like, I have legitimate concerns about the viability of AGI. Mostly on the basis of being aware of the extreme levels of computational power that are required to create sort of a single solution in a machine learning environment. I want to be careful what I'm saying because I'm actually like trimming close to non-disclosure agreements that I've signed. Um, tra- Developing a solution to a new problem is the most expensive aspect of machine learning. The reason machine learning can be useful in certain contexts is you will have a problem that you have to solve over and over again for different series of inputs. And if you've done this problem in the past and you have a sizable chunk of previously solved situations, that can form the set to train. And that training makes it so that it can consistently solve the problem over and over again. The training itself is very expensive. Regular retraining that you're going to have to do as you gain more circumstances, because it will get things wrong, is also very expensive. Like, the reason people point to LLMs to become AGI is LLMs are training and retraining to be language processing tools. Of note, they're using a model of language that, my understanding, talking to linguists, has been that linguists don't actually believe that model anymore. They stopped like 20 years ago believing that model. So it's perhaps not a good language processing tool, because when you're trying to train a model using machine learning, you want to use kind of the most accurate knowledge. Because if you know how a system works programmatically, if you don't have a black box, the smaller your black box is, the less you have to train your model. And training is the expensive part of any sort of model. So LLMs are very expensive because language is a very complicated black box. I had a point, and I feel like I've wandered away from the point. But yeah, I do think it's important that we keep in mind that he's criticizing AGI. I don't believe AGI. I don't believe AGI is actually viable because of the fact that when you're doing an actual generalized intelligence, every new issue you run into is a new problem from a sort of AI training framework. So, when you have it's like when you miss the bus on Monday morning, that's a problem that you have to address. And you have to find a new way to get to work, right? So you've missed the bus, you have to know, okay, I have to pull out and call an Uber, and then I have to reallocate my funds so I can cover the Uber, which means I have to not go out to eat this Friday or drinking this Saturday or whatever. And then when you come to, let's say, missing the bus on the way home from work, that's a different problem, because now maybe it's not the best thing to call an Uber. Maybe at this point it's better to just kind of chill and wait for the next bus because you're not in as big of a hurry to get home. Or maybe it's more important that you get home faster because it's your girlfriend's birthday or whatever. Exactly. Whatever gives an autistic girl a sense of terror requires retraining a half of the model. And an AGI that's being used in a business environment is going to be taking over the tasks of dozens of people, and it's going to need to retrain constantly. I don't want to say it's impossible, because theoretically this is entirely doable. Like, theoretically you can keep this model training and retraining itself. But again, training and retraining is the expensive part of so-called intelligent automation, which I don't like that phrase. I've disliked that phrase since like 2014 when they first started throwing it around. It's not a good phrase. None of this is intelligent, but it's going to be an extremely consuming thing. It's going to consume a lot of resources, a lot of power, and it's just not a viable technology. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the criticisms and thoughts that this potential arises in the Pope are inherently not useful. It just sank into me that the Pope is not criticizing AI as it is, but AI as it is being sold. So yeah, we must then avoid the Babel syndrome, namely the idolatry of profit that sacrifices the weak, a uniformity that neutralizes difference, and the pretense that a single language, even a digital one, can translate everything, including the mystery of the person, into data and performance. The risk of dehumanization, of building a future that excludes God and reduces the other to a means, is an ancient and ever-new temptation that today takes on a technological guise. Instead, let us choose the way of Nehemiah, which highlights the importance of working together to make the city of God a safe place for returning exiles. Rebuilding today means recognizing that precisely from the plurality of voices and visions which, even though they sometimes remind us of the confusion caused by a diversity of spoken languages, a bright possibility emerges. Indeed, this is the possibility of building together, of transforming diversity into a resource and making listening and dialogue the common ground upon which to cultivate justice and fraternity. Within this shared task, Christians discover their unique role of guiding actions towards God, so that in his light pluralism does not dissipate into disorder, but instead, through the practice of synodality, it becomes synodality. I don't actually know how to pronounce this word. We're going to say sonodality because I'm sure that's wrong. And it's, when we're guaranteed to be wrong, then everyone can criticize us, and that gives them fun. So, within this shared task, Christians discover their unique role of guiding actions towards God so that, in his light, pluralism does not dissipate into disorder, but instead, through the process of sonodality, becomes the space in which humanity rediscovers the solid foundations and its final end. In the book of Revelation, John sees the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God as a gift for all humanity. And this vision of grace is an invitation for us to work together in order to foster a peaceful, just, and dignified life and community within today's cities. Oh, Lime, you weren't here earlier? Earlier, the Pope had this little offhand comment during the introduction that feels like it was specifically a criticism of J.D. Vance. It was like, ooh, 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 ooh. Like, the girls are fighting. Woke DEI Pope is mean. I'm here for it. Oh, Woke DEI Pope isn't mean. I'm sure Woke DEI Pope is mean. He's mean. He's from Chicago. I grew up in the Midwest. I know Chicago. People in Chicago are mean. And they'll do it with a smile on their face. We love Chicago. It's a third greatest city in the world after Baltimore, Philadelphia. J.D. Vance executed Francis. Leo has a right to hate him. Yeah, exactly. As I said, Sahil, third greatest in the world. I'm so sorry. I'm being mean. No, I'm sure. No, I'm sure there's also. I'm sure there's even better places in other parts of the world I haven't been to. It is my understanding that the Pope was invited to the 250th birthday of the U.S. and went, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go visit this monastery that's very unimportant in the other side of the world on that day." Which was such a Midwestern way to say fuck you. It is such. Yeah, no, the other day, during Matt's stream, when I think it was Snap. I don't remember exactly. I was beginning to get very tired, but someone, I think Snap, was mentioning how in the Pacific Northwest they'll address emails in a particular order, and changing the order of who is in where on the email chain can be very, very, like, insulting and mean. And I'm like, and like everyone was really confused, and I was just holding my tongue because I have done that. I have uh, swapped around because like you send an email in a corporate chain, you're supposed to like target is the person you need to know, and then you CC like the next need to knows who aren't like the target of action, and you put them in order of importance. So the most important person's first, and then it gets less and less. And I have swapped that order around to give little insults to people before. Because that's like also a Midwestern thing. You know, you have to say, you have to address everyone. You can't give people first authorship. Yeah, but like if you're writing the email, you're writing to the person you want to have something for, and then in the CCs you list people. And like sometimes you put people in the CCs as an act of aggression against the target, saying, your boss knows about this, so you better fucking do it. But like, you may also put the boss's boss in. And if you do that, you're supposed to put the boss's boss first and then the boss. But if you put the boss and then the boss's boss, now you're basically saying, I'm emailing you because you need to have this information. I'm emailing your boss because he needs to know you have this information. So when you don't do that, and then I'm also emailing his boss because I don't trust you or your boss to do the shit. And you can do a similar thing, like when you are giving thanks and you're reading afterwards. Like, the part of all the speeches that everyone hates, where you're like, and special thanks to blah, 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 blah. The order of that is important. You want to give that in an order from, like, the person who's done the most to the person who's done the least. And you can shift that around to give little minor social snubs. Sometimes I like to just completely turn it on its head and go from the least important person to the most important person, so that the most important people have to wait until the end to hear their name. That's a great way to piss everyone off. I love it. Yeah, last but not least, last but not least is least. Last but not least is usually least, unless you're specifically, like, dropping someone to last for a reason. Yeah, last but not least is there to make the person at the end feel like they weren't the least. They weren't lying to you, they were lying to the person at the end. But also, you might not put the least important person at the end. You might put the most important at the end because you want them to like linger. It really depends, and I can understand why you wouldn't like it, because it's like the sort of thing I only like because it lets me be really socially acceptably mean to people, and I'm a horrible, horrible sadist. But yeah. There's a lot of this, so we should probably keep focused. I should get myself back on task. Building for the common good. Building a city founded on the common good implies, first and foremost, building on a firm relationship with God. It means recognizing the truth of his love calls us to life in all its fullness, and communion with him. Like, as long as in all its fullness doesn't include gay sex. I'm sorry, that's mean, but I tend to agree. Call us to life in all its fullness. And then people will be like, grr, why are you living life in all of its fullness? That's sin. Rah. If he didn't want the criticism. Yeah, exactly. Like St. Augustine, we too can say, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. Indeed, God has inscribed in our hearts a desire for happiness that embraces all dimensions of life. The Church, in dialogue with the men and women of our time, recognizes the urgent need to safeguard and guide this aspiration towards its deepest truth. Secondly, building for the common good means accepting the limits and weakness of humanity without considering them an error to be corrected. Today, the human desire for fullness of life is at risk of being misled by deceitful goals, such as the prospect of a technology that promises to free us from all weakness, and models of well-being that leave behind entire populations. All too often, we place our hope in unlimited upgrades, in forms of progress that exacerbate inequalities, and in immediate solutions incapable of healing people's wounds. As a result, while some pursue the illusion of unlimited self-assertion, many are deprived of basic necessities. The Church reminds us with a firm yet humble voice that true fulfillment is not achieved by eliminating weakness, but through harmonious growth. It is found where freedom and responsibility are intertwined with mutual care and true solidarity, and where progress is measured by the dignity of each person and the good of all peoples. I'll co-sign that with the asterisk. Don't be calling transition deceitful goals. You know that part of him is gonna be like counting trans people as that deceitful goal and viewing transition as a part of this unlimited self-assertion. Like, that's a pretty common false belief about transition and what it means to be trans. So I with that asterisk, I co-sign paragraph 12 here. I like that. Thirdly, building a world in which everyone can flourish I shouldn't put his words in his mouth, though. He might not. He might be more aware than we want to believe that this is not accurate. I just recognize this as something I've heard coming out of the mouths of, I don't like saying it, this phrase. There's probably a better phrase, enlightened transphobes. Is that a good phrase? That's a bad phrase, but I hope my meaning comes across. Thirdly, building a world in which everyone can flourish requires shared responsibility and courage. No one can single-handedly bear the weight of the challenges the world is facing, just as no one is so weak that they cannot play their part. For power is made perfect in weakness. All are given their own section of the wall. Scientists and researchers, entrepreneurs and workers, educators and legislators, civil society, popular movements, and faith communities. It is the logic of subsidiarity, which values the cooperation between generations, peoples, disciplines, and cultures as the best way for fostering stability, prosperity, and peace. We should not be intimidated by tensions or differences because they can become creative forces when guided by shared responsibility. I think this paragraph requires us to keep in mind the distinction between entrepreneurs and capitalists, which capitalists like to make fuzzier. A capitalist is an individual whose purpose is maximizing profit and maximizing the growth of their own share of capital. An entrepreneur is someone who has a vision of some sort of organization or product or process that they work to bring into the world. The two are often hand in hand in the modern society, but you'll have, I know exactly the half dozen or so people in our local DSA chapter who would want to murder me for what I'm about to say. Even under communism, we would have entrepreneurs, because there will always be people who want to do a thing and just go out and start getting it done. And those are the people that word describes. They just happen to be in alignment with capital in the current system. Brah. Finally, building for the common good requires an evangelical language. Boo! I hate evangelical language. We must avoid humiliating or antagonistic words, opting rather for clarity that sheds light and frankness. that unlocks new possibilities. We I know what he means here, so it's not like you must come to Jesus. It's when you're doing evangelism, you're not supposed to go do things like, "What are you, an idiot? You can't believe that. That's wrong. Come here, let me tell you what's true." You kind of have to meet people midway and guide them in with kind of kindness and shit. We cannot condone naive enthusiasm nor fuel unfounded fears. Instead, let us establish standards for discernment, the dignity of the human person, the universal destination of goods, the preferential option for the poor, care for our common home, and peace. And let us translate those standards into practices, such as responsible planning, assessment of human and social impact, and inclusion of the most vulnerable, the promotion of digital literacy, and the guiding research and industry towards justice and peace. Yeah, exactly. Like, he's not wrong in the sense that if you want to bring someone over to your point of view, you can't be antagonistic. But also, not everyone is going to come over to your point of view, and sometimes you're not having the argument for the sake of the person you're talking to. I think he's viewing like a lot of. I think this is an attack on the anti-AI crowd. Like, it's attack on us more than it is the AI people. Like, we're very aggressive, and we're like, "You're burning the world." And he's like, "You're not going to convince them that way." And I think he has a misunderstanding that we don't want to convince them. We want to strip them of their power and their property to do this because they are doing harm and they are doing damage to the world. And you don't plead with the person. You don't try to calmly convince the person with the shotgun not to shoot you. You get in within the guard of the shotgun, you force it down towards the floor where it's not facing anyone, and you get it out of the person's hands so you can, make sure they're not getting shot. The guy you like, Sahil, who you recommended his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita to me at one point, and I started reading it, and then I got really angry, and I stopped and started reading the entire Mahabharata instead. He did a similar thing at the beginning. I know I mentioned that to you, where he starts criticizing a couple of people for what their actions are, and in the process kind of confused normal preparations for a military engagement at different levels of the hierarchy with one another and with kind of the frame of mind to be in civilian governmental life. And it really irritated me. The Pope is doing a similar thing here, right? Like, there's an actual conflict ongoing. There's immediate harm. You want to have this kinder evangelical language to kind of pull your third parties in, but also you really need, like, the undecided third parties need to be aware of what the harm is here and go and know that they're doing damage. And these are not discussions aimed at convincing the AI people, because the AI people are already convinced. They're building their machine god. They can't be evangelized into this. They need to be defeated. Rawr. I should take a sip and calm down. Rationalists make my blood boil. More than maybe other people, because, we're still in the introduction. Oh, goodness gracious. But, yeah. Rationalists make my blood boil more than others because I have to deal with them in my day job, and they are insufferable. In the recent ordinary Jubilee year of 2025, we walked as pilgrims of hope and were blessed with many graces. Strengthened by these gifts, we can move by these gifts, we can move forward with confidence to face the arduous tasks and demanding challenges that lie ahead. In the era of artificial intelligence, when human dignity is threatened by new forms of dehumanization, ours is the pressing duty to remain profoundly human. We must lovingly safeguard the grandeur of humanity bestowed upon us and reveal in its fullness in Christ. And revealed in its fullness in Christ, the splendor of which no machine can ever replace. True progress always stems from a heart open to others, an intelligence willing to listen, and a will that seeks what unites rather than what separates. I address this heartfelt appeal to all Catholic faithful, all Christians, and all men and women of goodwill. Hey, it's me, I'm the women of goodwill. Yay! Let us not be afraid to get our hands dirty on the construction site of our time. Like Nehemiah, let us pray, plan wisely, and work perseveringly, placing God at the forefront of our actions and the human person at the center of our choices. Thus, the rejected stones, the poor, sick, migrant, and least among us, will be the cornerstone, and a solid, welcoming common home will emerge on the earth, where love and faithfulness will finally meet, and righteousness and peace will embrace. This is the blessing we implore from God, and the task that stands before us is that of being builders of communion, rather than the architects of Babel. We are to be servants in the coming kingdom instead of lords of towers destined for ruin. With the heart of a shepherd and a father, I ask everyone to abandon the construction of yet another Tower of Babel, and join forces in building up the common good, so that humanity will never lose its beauty, and the world will once again come to recognize the human heart as the place where God desires to dwell. Okay, so that was only the introduction, so I can't say this with certainty, but I think a lot of the news articles that I was seeing this morning about this encyclical were portraying him as being more aggressive than he is. At least in the introduction. Because if I were to have to stop now and only go on what I hear in the introduction, I would have to say that his position is, hey, as AI becomes a thing, we need to make sure that it is being used to promote a unified humanity and the goodness of all, rather than empowering a few stupid billionaires. And the media, which I think I call billionaire-owned in my little thing, it's billionaire-owned, and it's reporting that he is attacking AI, so como si, como sa. That's where I stand as we go into Chapter 1. A dynamic approach faithful to the gospel. In the first chapter, I intend to present synthetically how the social doctrine of the Church has taken shape in the recent papal magisterium and in the Second Vatican Council, in order to demonstrate its dynamic character. Indeed, in each era, the res novae require that this teaching address historical questions in the light of revealed truth. In this regard, artificial intelligence, too, should not be considered as merely yet another theme to be studied or crisis to be managed, but rather as a development that challenges the categories of social doctrine from within, calling for their further development in fidelity with the gospel. Okay. This overview, however, would not be very comprehensive if, before reflecting on the contribution of individual popes and their most recent documents, we do not first clarify fundamental principles concerning the way in which the Church exists in history and relates to the world. Failing to do so would expose social doctrine to the risk of being perceived as an undue interference in worldly matters or as an external code of ethics imposed from above. In reality, it stems from a church that walks alongside humanity and recognizing the autonomy of earthly realities and the distinction between ecclesiastical and political communities. For this very reason, she strives to serve the common good. Once again, she, I do believe, is the church. So sad, Sahil, you can't force Fem the Catholic Church. She's already a woman. So sad. I know this was one of your lifelong desires. and I'm so sad to disappoint. The Church is present in the world as a sign of unity for the entire human family. She recognizes today's questions and challenges the current setting in which to carry out her particular vocation of listening, dialogue, and service, and of being responsive to everything concerning the lives of contemporary men and women. This involvement in people's lives helps the Church understand ever more clearly her mission, has historical scope, and entails a responsibility for the way in which social relations are built. For this reason, she cannot consider herself a stranger to forces shaping society. On the contrary, the Church actively participates in the processes by which society grows and is organized, and she offers her own contribution to the creation of a more just and fraternal society. Pope Francis emphasized this historical dimension of the Church's mission. No one can demand that religion should be relegated to the inner sanctum of personal life, without influence on societal and national life, without concern for the soundness of civil institutions, without a right to offer an opinion of events affecting society. The Church's vocation and duty to accompany humanity in the specifics of history leads her to recognize that earthly realities possess their own proper character and order. The Second Vatican Council expressed this principle with particular precision in the pastoral constitution Gaudium et Spes, whose 60th anniversary remembered and celebrated with gratitude on 7 December 2025. If by the autonomy of earthly affairs is meant that created things and societies themselves enjoy their own laws and values, then the demand for autonomy is perfectly in order. This affirmation shows that creation bears the imprint of original goodness that our human outlook must preserve, cultivate, and bring to fulfillment. In this regard, the Church offers herself in a way that helps to interpret reality in all its depth. She supports with humble firmness the choices that promote the dignity of every person, the cohesion of communities, and the good of all. The Church thus stands alongside the world without overpowering it, so that the promise of justice and peace that the Holy Spirit continues to sustain in the heart of humanity may come to fruition in every human endeavor. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good to me. I wish that were what we were experiencing, but I appreciate the intentionality. I'm sorry, that sounds more mean. I just point to my pinned comment. I made that at the start of stream, and it hasn't become less true. It's difficult to hear the Church thus stands alongside the world without overpowering it in a community where I have friends who are overpowered by the Church. Recognizing that God upholds the freedom of men and women in the unfolding of history, the Second Vatican Council affirmed the distinction between the ecclesial community and the political community, emphasizing that each must operate with full autonomy. The Church's presence in the world is also yeah, that is an interesting criticism. I think that even if not the Pope isn't woke, I think every institution and every group of people has a right and responsibility to involve itself in public discourse. That's what public means. So, but yeah, I mean, it's only a couple popes ago that we had a non-woke pope. I don't think there's much question. That said, I don't think there's much point in arguing about it, because the fact is that the Catholic Church will involve itself in public discourse. I think it's impossible for an institution of its scope not to. If there's a sizable portion of the population that is attending church and hearing sermons, and those sermons are coming down from a central sense of doctrine in some way or form, then that is the public discourse. YouTube, I am trying to use you as a background music. Rawr. Recognizing that God upholds the freedom of men and women in the unfolding of history, the Second Vatican Council affirmed the distinction between the ecclesiastical community and the political community, emphasizing that each must operate with full autonomy. The Church's presence in the world is also expressed through her relationship with civil society and public institutions. By engaging with these entities, the Church acknowledges the value of social and political realities and honors their specific responsibilities, supporting everything that fosters the well-being of individuals and strengthens the fabric of society. Ideally, the Church does not claim to assume the functions belonging to the state. Yeah, that hasn't been true in a while. On the contrary, she esteems those who serve the common good, and she firmly acknowledges the responsibility that civil institutions hold within society. At the same time, the mission entrusted to the Church prompts her to address the real suffering of the men and women of our time. This closeness does not stem from an intent to supplant civil institutions, much less from an implicit criticism of their work. Rather, it stems from evangelical charity, which impels the Church to draw near the wounds of humanity wherever they surface with greater severity. When the Church intervenes, she does so following the example of the Good Samaritan, with discretion and closeness, aware that what arises from urgent necessity cannot become the norm, nor replace the institutional responsibilities proper to the civil community. Yeah, this works. I know I've yapped at you before when we're sitting on the couch, Sahil, about like works and faith, and this is what is meant by works. Is if you believe and you're a spiritual person, you need to go out and do freaking good in the world, help the poor, help the injured, etc. And we see this in every religion. This isn't a Christian-only thing. Islam teaches this. Paganism teaches this. The Mahabharata tells you to go do this in a couple of places. Like, I have yet to encounter a religion that does not, in some way, shape, or form, demand you go out there and do this. Even Levian Satanism has portions where they're pointing at you saying, hey, go forth and do this shit. So, like, it's a universal. And it's a good one. Ideally. Again, in practice, Catholic Church does not always live up to that lofty standard. But I'm not going to be critical of that. We're, at least in this section. I've already been critical of it. I'll be critical of it again. It's going to be a repeated thing coming out of my mouth, probably, but let it not decline that, yes, that is good. If the Catholic Church does what Pope Leo is saying, that is good. Saying to do, that is good. Starting from this twofold acknowledgement, the autonomy of earthly realities and the distinction between ecclesiastical and political spheres of competence allows for a cleaner understanding of the direction the Second Vatican Council set for the Church in her relationship with the world. Gaudium et Spes reminds us that it is the task of the whole people of God, particularly its pastors and theologians, to listen to and distinguish the many voices of our times and to interpret them in the light of God's Word, in order that the revealed truth may be more deeply penetrated, better understood, and more suitably presented. Listening to the many voices is no mere sociological exercise, but requires spiritual discernment. Guided by the Spirit, the people of God come to recognize in cultural and social transformations both the signs of the presence of Christ, who comes and guides history towards its fulfillment, and those aberrations that obscure his face. In this way, the essential core of revealed truth is not altered, but made explicit and adapted as a living standard for guiding concrete choices, inspiring paths of personal and communal conversion, promoting structural reforms, and supporting new forms of evangelical witness in public life. History is thus understood as one of the places in which the Church allows herself to be taught by the Spirit about the humanizing power of the gospel, and she learns to develop her own teaching at the service of dignity of every person and the good of all peoples. And every non-Christian in this chat flinches a little, but we're not going to dwell on it. We know that Christianity is an evangelical faith. And I think we all recognize that there are, you know, there's good and bad in the world, and there's good things and bad things that people say. So, in principle, there's nothing untoward being said there. It's just that most of chat here has, at some point, been on the receiving end of being called an abomination. And going, no. The wisdom of the Word of God in dialogue with the human sciences. The Church regards all who sincerely seek truth, goodness, and beauty as companions on the journey, and considers them as precious allies in defending the dignity of every person and in caring for creation. Except for when they don't. I'm sorry, that was too mean for me. Adopting the pastoral approach, the Second Vatican Council, which invites us to listen, discern, and interpret the signs of the times, and enlightened by the wisdom of the Word, the Church is not afraid to encounter human knowledge. Indeed, the Word of God provides reliable standards for establishing paths of justice and opening ways of reconciliation and peace among peoples. When it comes to applying those standards to the complex situations of our time, the contributions of philosophy and of human and social sciences is essential. These disciplines help us understand and analyze cultural, economic, and political dynamics more deeply. St. John Paul II recalled that the Church welcomes the contributions of the social sciences in order to draw from them concrete insights that help her carry out her magisterial office. A dialogue with such kinds of knowledge does not diminish the power of the gospel. On the contrary, it makes possible to identify with greater clarity what genuinely fosters the lives of individuals and communities. Following this perspective, Pope Francis emphasized that when dealing with many specific questions, the Church does not claim to offer a definitive opinion, but recognizes the importance of listening to scientific research and of encouraging a serious and honest debate among experts while welcoming a diversity of opinions. Nourished by this fruitful dialogue between gospel and human knowledge, the Church has progressively developed her social doctrine, cultivating in history a wise patrimony marked by theological and anthropological coherence rooted in Christian understanding of the person. Precisely because this patrimony arises from faith and a corresponding vision of reality, it does not amount to a repertoire of technical solutions or an economic or political model to be set against others. Instead, it belongs to a different order, that of the principles that guide the interpretation of events and sustain an evangelical understanding of historical processes and the choices they entail. Herein lies the proper function of social doctrine, which does not claim to supplant the responsibilities of politics and institutions, but offers itself as a foundation for collective discernment, helping to recognize and promote whatever serves the dignity of persons, vitality of communities, and common good. To summarize in more plain English, how to summarize that in more plain English? Basically, he's saying that the Church is not here to dictate economic or political policy, but to establish kind of the framework of moral judgment. Which I think, yeah, that's kind of the Church's role. We may disagree with them as arbiter thereof, blah, 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 but it's very tempting to read it as a cop-out, but I think it is more accurately a declaration of a reduced scope. Kind of saying, hey, just because we're telling people just because we're telling the people that this is bad doesn't mean that the government doesn't have to do anything. Which, yeah. I don't know. As someone who exists more in the political sphere than the religious, yeah. Okay. Social doctrine as shared discernment. Understanding that the truth is a gift to be shared, not a possession to be monopolized, frees the Church from the temptation of seeking forms of presence based on power. Does it, though? That's going to be the first statement in this entire thing that really makes me go, like, there's been a lot of little asterisk. Like, yeah, but asterisk. But there. Does it, though? Does understanding truth is to be shared free you from seeking forms of presence based on power? Really? Because you still have all of the fancy robes and the lovely churches and the cathedrals and all of the imposing edifices of presence based on power. I'm sorry, I'm being maybe a little mean, but it's a little silly to be at the head of one of the most powerful institutions in the world and say that you're freed from the temptation of seeking forms based on power. In order to rediscover the evangelical approach of a gentle proclamation of truth that is not imposed, St. John Paul II invited us to examine honestly the times when acquiescence was given to intolerance and the use of violence in service of truth. In the same vein, I too have reaffirmed that the Church does not claim to possess a monopoly on truth, because truth is not a territory to be defended, but a good to be shared. For his part, Pope Francis expressed the same perspective in his striking phrase, "Time is greater than space." What matters most is not occupying positions of power or defending cultural strongholds, but initiating good processes. Okay, I understand what he's saying more. Yeah, okay, I can buy it then. In this way, the truth of the gospel is not imposed from above, but grows over time within the concrete interweaving of lives, communities, and cultures. This is not a truth that fears diversity, but instead welcomes and guides it. It does not eliminate conflicts, but transforms them, reuniting that which history tends to scatter. This concept can be illustrated by the image of a multifaceted polyhedron, in which the one truth of the gospel is reflected from different angles. Roll that D20. Let's go. No, okay. Yeah, okay. The initial sentence, I'm just like, but no, as it has been explained, okay, yeah, I see. This attitude of openness to truth, which at the same time both one and diverse, profoundly expresses the Catholicity of the Church, where she embraces the entire human family, yet is also immersed in the concrete situations of peoples and cultures. The Second Vatican Council reminds us that, in virtue of this very Catholicity, each part contributes its own gifts to the other parts and the entire Church. In this way, the Church grows as a whole and as individual communities thanks to a mutual exchange and to shared efforts towards an ever fuller communion. It follows then that the people of God are not only gathered together from many peoples, but are also intertwined through different functions, vocations, cultures, and traditions, each being called to support and enrich one another. From this perspective, St. Paul VI acknowledged that, given the great variety of historical situations, it's unrealistic to think that the Church's social doctrine can propose a single response that's valid in all contexts. For this reason, he invited each Christian community to interpret the reality in its own country with clarity and responsibility. The fruitful tension between universality of the Church's mission and her local roots is an intrinsic aspect of her life, where she encompasses the whole world, while addressing the specific issues of each context as the real setting in which the gospel takes shape. Okay, yeah, that's going to be true for any international org. Yep. I'm reading this like I'm being too critical. No, yeah. If this were not the stance of the Catholic Church, I would be very concerned about their ability to sustain themselves in the future. In light of what has been said so far, the Church's social doctrine can be seen more authentically. It's not a handbook of principles and norms to be applied, but a process of shared discernment. It is born from the encounter between internal truth of the gospel and the questions of history. It allows itself to be challenged by the signs of the times and draws nourishment from the contributions of science, culture, and human experience. Therefore, when the dignity of our brothers and sisters is violated, when politics fails to address the tragedies of humanity and the economy turns against the person, or science oversteps the limits of its competence, the Church, together with other Christian denominations and believers of other religions, must make her voice heard, not in order to dominate, but to promote communion. Understood in this way, social doctrine becomes a theology of communion and history, a history in which the Word made flesh continues to be present through dialogue, memory, and prophecy. Okay. The autistic person in me is kind of going, maybe you should have a little bit more of a handbook of principles and norms to be applied that you like revisit and revise regularly. That might help a little bit with some of the more terrible people. But then I remember Islam has that. It's called the Quran, and that doesn't stop horrible people from being horrible. So, fair. Every religion, every religion I've ever met has had horrible people who subvert it to the sake of to the cause of power, and honest people who use it as a road to truth. I think Pope Leo is probably mostly the latter. But also, I don't think you get to be in a position of authority in any institutionalized religion without being a little of the former. But I'm not seeing anything super objective in social doctrine as shared discernment. Yay! Good job. Development of the social doctrine from Leo XIII to the present. Having outlined the way in which the Church is present in history and engages in dialogue with the world, I'd like to consider the development of the social doctrine in the Magisterium, which is not the country in Anbanar. It is just the authority of the doctrine in the Catholic Church. I'm sorry, I've been playing a lot of Anbanar lately, so every time I read Magisterium, I think of the little island of mages. I would like to consider the social development of the social doctrine in the Magisterium, which has responded to the major social transformations from the 19th century to present day. Naturally, I cannot do justice to the full richness of this teaching, whose fundamental principles are presented in the Compendium on the Social Doctrine of the Church, and have been further examined by recent magisterial teaching. It's here, if you want to read it. It's very long. Put it into chat in case someone wants to read it. There you go. If you ever want to read it, there it is. I'm not going to read it. Not on stream. This isn't a Catholic stream. Otherwise I might. But no, we're just reading this because, I don't know, I had the gut feeling that the news was misrepresenting, and the news and discourse were misrepresenting what the Pope was saying. So I wanted to just kind of go through it, read it, yap about it, develop a stance. Nor can I systematically explore everything that has been developed in the encyclicals of my late venerable predecessors, especially in Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti. Nevertheless, I'll emphasize some essential points in order to show how present text stands in continuity with that tradition. I'd also like to stress how, within this tradition, the unchanging core revealed truths regarding the human person and society is constantly intertwined with a renewed capacity for listening to historical situations and for responding to contemporary issues. I will now review some of the significant stages of this development, beginning with the period inaugurated by the Encyclical Rerum Novarum, which, once again, on capital and labor. If there's one text we've mentioned here that I'm tempted to stop and read, it's that one. I don't think I'll do it on stream. Especially when we're like a quarter of the way through. It's been nearly 2 hours. Oh no! The first stage of the Church's social doctrine. What we now call the social doctrine of the Church is not a spontaneous product of the modern age. Instead, it's the fruit of receiving and structuring a long tradition of ecclesial reflection on life and society rooted in the sacred scripture, the church fathers, and the theological and legal developments of the Middle Ages and modern era. Although the expression social doctrine of the church was coined by Pius XII in 1950, its content began to take shape as an organic corpus of social teaching with Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum. Confronted with the new things of his time, the conflict between capital and labor, the question of the workforce, and economic and social transformations, Leo XIII did not limit himself merely to acknowledging the unrest, but saw these situations as an area for the Church's pastoral mission. He exposed them to rigorous discernment, illuminating their causes and possible solutions in light of the gospel and an integral vision of the human person created in the image of God. St. John Paul II regarded this approach as a lasting paradigm of social doctrine, an exemplary practice through which the Church, when faced with historical changes, exercises her right and duty to examine social realities, make pronouncements about them, and indicate paths for finding just solutions. In this way, the perennial contents of the faith and ancient ecclesial wisdom find expression in a living doctrine that remains faithful to the gospel while growing in response to the new things of every era. Leo XIII's Encyclical constitutes a milestone in the development of the Church's social teaching. The document places the dignity of work and of workers at the forefront of its reflection, affirms the right to a fair wage for oneself and one's family, recognizes that persons have a fundamental value that takes precedence over capital and profit, defends private property along with its indispensable societal role, esteems workers' associations, and proposes forms of cooperation between the different components of society as an alternative to the mentality of class struggle. It is not surprising, then, that Pius XI defined it as the Magna Carta of Christian social action. In Rerum Novarum, the Church's ancient wisdom regarding the human person and life in society took on a new form, capable of responding to the industrial age, and offering the first major systemic framework for social doctrine that would be further developed in the following decades. While many of the historical conditions described by Leo XIII have changed, at least two insights remain highly relevant today. The primacy of human labor over any mindset focused solely on finance and productivity, with the consequent attention to the people and families most susceptible to exploitation, and the inseparable link between proclaiming the gospel and pursuing a more just social order. Rerum Novarum thereby continues to remind us that there is no authentic evangelization that does not affect the structures of human society. I cannot help but read that particular paragraph in the context of the model of the base, the superstructure, and the spectacle as a superstructural... What is the word I'm looking for? That there is an adjustment arising from exploitation in the base that is driving a potential collapse of the power structures, and this framework is creating a superstructural safety valve to preserve some aspect of that exploitation while relieving other harmful consequences thereof, to preserve the social order from which the powerful, including Pope Leo XIII, benefit. But hey, that's the class struggle theoretic perspective. I think it's very, very common for people to hear the phrase class struggle and see it as something more simple than it is and react against it. I think it's a very elucidative phrase, but it's also a very offensive one. I don't mean that in the sense of like, oh, it's mean or it's cruel, but like, if you hear it and you don't know what it's representing and you don't look into it, it's like, I don't want to fight. I don't want a war. I don't want to struggle. Because we don't like that. We like peace. So it's very, you turn away from it. But then when you understand what it's phrasing, it's a very elucidative turn because the struggle is already existing. Capital and profit drive you into the ground and want to destroy you and your humanity. Class struggle is what I do when I have to go to work. Oh. That's one hell of a teacher joke. That's one hell of a teacher joke. Baltimore City Public Schools, please start at a sensible time so your students can get to class on time instead of being like late halfway through first period because they have to travel across the city. Also, Baltimore City Public Schools abandon charters, abolish school choice. School choice is just a technique. School choice and charter schools are just a technique that racist white people can use to secure their kids going to the nice private school on the taxpayer's dime by throwing a bone to the more, white passing of their non-white neighbors. Rah. That's a phrase that will piss off a lot of people. I'll say it's a rare Nebraska win. A rare Nebraska win that we don't have, that we did not have charter schools. Charter schools bad. Howdy, Father Monkey. We're being controversial in this stream where we're reading the Pope's recent encyclical. You went to a public charter? It was probably fine for you. Yeah. Yeah, Nebraska has quite a few good policies that are disconnected from one another and make absolutely no sense in the other broad things. Yeah. Charter schools are not good, just in general. They are very inefficient on a cost perspective. They're so weird. I still am completely flabbergasted that charter schools manage to get sold anywhere. But that's not what we're here for. We're not here for charter schools. We're here to read this. We're 2 hours into stream and less than a quarter of the way through the encyclical because we keep getting off topic. Ignoring what I think is because as I said at the beginning, I want to be charitable. The topic of the encyclical, let's reopen it in a new tab so I don't lose where I am. Hopefully that doesn't say my position. Magnifica Humanitas, on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. And I said at the beginning, I'm going to try and read this from the beginning to end as charitably as I can. If I see an ambiguity or a thing that looks like it's easy to be mean to, I'm going to be as charitable as possible. And charitably, Pope Leo XIII's opposition to class struggle is what I had just previously mentioned about people like peace and they don't like fighting, so the phrase class struggle makes some people go, no, we don't want to do that. Overall, though, I'm liking everything here except the defends private property. I am a socialist. Obviously, I have my criticisms of private property and the distinction that socialists have between private and personal property. But otherwise, good on the Catholic Church for doing all of this affirmation early on about the importance of placing labor before profit. So our next section in what we're currently doing is Pope Leo XIV's presentation of the history of what he calls the social doctrine of the Catholic Church, which I think is a standard term. Pius XI encyclical Quadragesima Anno was published in 1931 on the 40th anniversary of Rerum Novarum at the height of a major global economic crisis, marking a further step in the Church's social teaching. Rather than limiting itself to addressing the workforce question, it broadens its focus to encompass the overall structure of economic and political order. The encyclical denounces the concentration of economic power in the hands of a few, criticizes both unlimited competition and collectivist projects that undermine the freedom and responsibility of the individual, strongly affirms workers' right to association, and reiterates the requirement that wages be proportionate not only to performance, but the needs of workers and their families. Within this framework, Pius XI systemically formulated the principles of subsidiarity, which was to become one of the cornerstones of social doctrine. According to this principle, whatever can be carried out by individuals, families, intermediary organizations, and local communities should not be carried out by higher level authorities. Alongside these contributions in various interventions of his magisterium, from the encyclicals Non Abbiamo Bisogno and Mit Prender Sorge to Divini Redemptoris, Pius XI clearly recalled the societal role of private property and denounced forms of totalitarianism that demean the dignity of the person, stifle life in society, exalt the state above its just value, and discriminate according to race. At least 3 insights of his social teaching remain particularly relevant today. The awareness that injustice concerns not only individual behavior, but also economic and institutional structures. The importance of the principle of subsidiarity, which calls for strengthening the fabric of associations and communities while avoiding further centralization of power. And the link between the dignity of work, fair remuneration, and the genuine possibility of families to lead a dignified life. Yeah, Pius XI is the guy who is doing the anti-Soviet writings and the anti-Nazi writings. Obviously, as socialists, we're going to have criticisms of Pius XI's take, but as a more libertarian socialist, haha, let's use the phrase that everyone hates. No, as someone who takes kind of a more syndicalist, federalist orientation of my socialism, I do like in principle, I like the principle of subsidiarity. I think I've said similar things in our local discussions that decisions need to be made at the lowest level impacted. Collectivism is very good. People who... I think people have a tendency to think collectivism as destroying the individual, and anyone who's worked with collectivism kind of knows that's not the case. But I don't imagine... this is a very ideological versus our more material perspective. I can see where someone who is ideological and lives in an ideological circle may hear propaganda about the impacts of this on individuals, or see states seizing companies and projects that, historically have been the livelihoods of families and reportioning them to provide for the state and the public good as a whole as being offenses to those individuals and those families. But yeah, I don't really have a conclusion there. Yep, that's what Pius that's what Pius XI said. Yeah, principle of subsidiarity, good. Maybe overly critical of collectivism. Not really the point of the encyclical. This is still the historical context, so I don't want to dwell on it. I'm sure we could, though. I'm sure we could go through each of those encyclicals and deconstruct them from a post-Marxist perspective and come up with, some good things and bad things in each of them. But we're already over 2 hours in here, and we haven't actually gotten to the substance of what the Pope has said, so we need to maybe stop criticizing every little thing. This is why no one likes leftists. This is why no one likes us. No, sorry, I'm doing it too. This is why no one likes us. So fun, though. Every idea out there seems almost every idea has a good and a bad. Fine, we'll continue criticizing everything and we'll be here until Thursday. We don't go home till we're done. Rawr. In the tragic context of the Second World War and the years of Reconstruction that followed, the teachings of Pius XII made significant contribution to the development of social doctrine. This is particularly true of his Christmas radio messages, in which he outlined the framework of an international order based on justice, peace, and the recognition of human dignity. Yay, I love all three of those things. What does he mean by them? In these messages, the Pope proposed a dialogue with society based on an appeal to natural law, understood as a set of objective principles that precede the interests of individuals and states, and which must regulate both the internal life of nations and their mutual relations. Pius XII also attributed a decisive role to professional associations, labor unions, and various intermediary organizations in the economic and social order. He recognized these organized forms of society as an essential safeguard for civil equilibrium and protecting the common good. He affirmed the need for sound rule of law, for guarding against the abuse of power, and he recognized democracy as a means for ensuring the proper exercise of authority. At the same time, he warned against any attempt to base law on utility or force, recalling that an international order governed by the advantage of the strongest exposes weaker peoples to oppression and fundamentally undermines trust between nations. Finally, Pius XII identified profound economic imbalances between countries as one of the factors fueling conflict. Three guidelines remain particularly significant for our own times, currently marked by new forms of global power and growing inequalities. The need for law to take precedence over interests, the awareness that economic disparities are a breeding ground for tension and violence, and the necessity of a network of associations capable of mediating between the individual and the state. These guidelines continue to provide important criteria that enables social doctrine to interpret the dynamics of globalization and promote a more just and peaceful international order. This is why I didn't want to be too critical. This is why I wasn't wanting to be so critical a moment ago. Pius XII. We had Pius XI. We didn't have Pius XII yet. I knew Pius XII was a big union guy. So, there's been nearly a century since Pius XII, so so we expect that there's going to be changes. What I see here, though, is tension, right? In this development of history, I see a tension. Because I think at the core, these popes want to embody truth. And they recognize the truth that ultimately capital is bad, and it destroys relationships, it destroys people, it destroys the world. But also being individuals in a position of power that benefits indirectly from the successes of capital through better donations coming into the church, which leads to, all the things the church can do. They're in that tension between not wanting to criticize capital and also wanting to accept and live within the truth that capital is harmful. And I think what we're really seeing is attempts to square that circle. Capital bad. Capital is bad. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the Read the Pope's Encyclical about how AI is bad stream. So far, it's been very... AGI is, So far, it's been very, hi, we can't say no to the church can't say no to technology. We can only tell you how it should be spent. And now we're getting a history lecture from the Pope on the history of the church's social doctrine. So the years of the Second Vatican Council. A new phase of the church's social teaching began with St. John the 23rd, who placed a greater emphasis on the global dimension of social issues and the language of rights. In Mater et Magistra, he presented the Christian faith as a light capable of uniting heaven and earth. He recalled that while the church's... You know what? So when I read Transrad Femme, that was also a really popular stream, but it got a lot of weird chuds coming in and being transphobic in my chat. This has far fewer weird people coming in and being transphobic. So far, the only person who's come in and been weirdly transphobic has been the previous pope. May he rest in peace. So maybe I should read more encyclicals. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of Catholic encyclicals. I could read the Quran. I could read. Where was that suggestion Sahil had here? The piranhas. I could read piranhas at you. Piranhas. I said it like the fish. It's not the fish. The Hindu like scriptures. I think that there might be problems with the dogs hit with a dog fulfilling the previous requirements of the Pope, but no, I don't think there's any requirements. Yeah, I think the Cardinals could elect a dog Pope if they wanted. I and you know what? Considering that we're confirming sentience within crows and within whales and within dolphins, who knows? Maybe we will validate sentience within dogs, and maybe we'll get like the dog church, and they will, have a legitimate dog pope in a few centuries. Like I'm not making fun here. We're recognizing that humans are not the only intelligent, sentient, sapient creatures on this planet. Just because we cannot communicate now doesn't mean we won't be able to communicate in 60 years or 100 years, and it's entirely possible we may see Dog Pope in a few centuries. It sounds silly, but it's very, very like a thing that could happen. Hey, maybe Posadas wasn't as crazy as we think he is. Posadas was very crazy. He went mad getting tortured by fascists in Argentina. But his interesting ideas came after he went crazy. Hey, maybe we should read Posadas sometime. I haven't read Posadas in years. So yeah, again though, we've been here for 2 hours. We're barely getting started in the actual work. St. John the 23rd. In Mater et Magistra, he presented the Christian faith as a light capable of uniting heaven and earth. He recalled that while the Church's primary mission is the sanctification and proclamation of eternal goods, she does not neglect the concrete needs of people's daily lives and is concerned with every authentic human good. Based on this unified version of humanity, John the 23rd emphasized that societal life requires a balance between the initiative of citizens and groups who are called to organize themselves and work together, and the action of the state, which must coordinate and provide support without stifling the freedom and responsibility of individuals. Hence, he drew attention to fair remuneration for work, worker participation, and the growing disparities between countries. A few years later, in Pacem in Terris, John addressed for the first time not only the faithful, but also all people of goodwill, organically linking the dignity of the person to the recognition of fundamental rights and duties, and proposing a direction for society at the international level too, based on truth, justice, love, and freedom. In the present day, which is marked by widespread conflict and new forms of global interdependence, the following aspects of his thought remain particularly significant. The universal perspective of his appeal, his reference to human rights as a shared framework, and his conviction that lasting peace requires institutions and relations between peoples that are inspired by the dignity of every person. The Second Vatican Council marked a turning point in the Church's understanding of herself in the contemporary world. In the Pastoral Constitution, Gaudium et Spes, the Council presented the image of a church that is close to humanity, engaged with the world, and committed to reflecting on the concrete reality of historical situations, rather than abstract concepts. The text addresses the major issues of marriage and the family, economic and societal life, the political community, war, and peace. It insists that economic and institutional structures are just only to the extent that they serve the integral development of the person and promote the responsible participation of all. The importance of this The importance of this counselor document for the second doctrine of the Church lies not only in having opened up horizons for thematic reflection, but also in its method of discernment that invites us to interpret historical changes guided by the gospel and human expertise. This approach reveals that the dialogue with the world is not a tactical choice for the Church, but a concrete expression of her mission, because the gospel, like leaven, is capable of transforming the structures of society from within and forging paths towards a greater humanity. The declaration Dignitas Humanae can be included in the same context. Here, the Council recognized that religious freedom is a fundamental right grounded in human dignity that must be guaranteed by law, so as to prevent people from being forced to act against their conscience or impeded from seeking and professing the truth, both privately and publicly. This principle is highly relevant today and continues to provide social doctrine with decisive criteria for protecting individuals and building pluralistic and peaceful societies. And the entire time I was reading that, since the Levin example, my brain started saying, and socialism is like estrogen in that it can turn the harsh manliness of capital into the soft femininity of the workers' paradise. I'm terrible. Force femme society, embrace socialism. Workers' paradise is a good stripper name. Excellent. Uh, or I mean, I mostly am cool with this. This is pretty fine. Um, I imagine if we dig into the text in detail, we'll start seeing things like in this marriage and family situation that misrepresent and cause harm to LGBT individuals. I think we'll see stuff in here that kind of, in its details is going to fail fundamentally to address the exploitation of the working class, etc., etc., etc. But, it's pretty good. Though, thus far, it's pretty good. Uh, I am missing what we had in the introduction. The introduction had lots of little turns of phrase that were very obvious jabs from the Pope at specific individuals. Like there was a sentence where it's just like, "Oh, this is the Pope twisting the knife in JD Vance here." There's a portion here where the Pope is yelling at just the American government. Here's a section over in this corner where the Pope is kind of giving shit to Democrats for not doing things. Like there's all these little moments where the Pope is like attacking specific corners of the American political system, and it's just like, oh wow, yes, that's right. This is a Chicago Pope, but now we're in like this, and that's gone, which I'm a little sad to see go because those were fun. But it's good. Yeah. It's very clear, the Catholic Church, for all of its wrongs, one of which is pinned in chat. I'm always going to be mad about that. That is impacting friends of mine. That's impacting my community. And discourse is not going to resolve that. The Pope is going to have to tell the Catholic hospitals, hey, give medicine to trans people. But, yeah, like, it's very clear that, their hearts. This is going to sound meaner than it means to be, than it should be, because I'm getting under the influence of my southern girlfriend, but their hearts are in the right place. Bless their hearts. Their hearts are in the right place. Which I don't mean in the southern way. I mean that in the Midwestern way of their hearts are in the right place. We have criticisms, but we are going to, recognize that they're doing good. Or attempting to do good. Actually succeeding, como si, como sa, right? During the pontificate of St. Paul VI, an understanding of peace emerged that was not reduced to the mere absence of war, but took shape within the scope of integral human development. In Populorum Progressio, he described the development as a transition from less humane to more humane living conditions. He further understood it as a process that concerns each person and the whole person. That is, every dimension of the person and all people without exception. For this reason, Paul VI could affirm the development understood in this way is, in reality, the new name for peace, because it aims to eradicate the roots of injustice and conflict and create opportunities for a more dignified life for all. The establishment of the Pontifical Commission Justita et Pax should also be seen in this light as an attempt to give stable form to this insight at the ecclesial and international levels, while bearing in mind the growing gap between rich and poor countries and the need for policies that genuinely promote more humane living conditions for all. In Octogesima Adveniens, written on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, for those who weren't here earlier, Rerum Novarum is Leo the 13th, the previous Pope Leo, writing about how capitalism should not be the center of society, and while private property is important, priority needs to be given on protecting the worker over protecting profits. Which I think summarizes a lot of what's going on here. You're seeing the right idea, then there's a little poison seed of, but we don't want to push against the actual fundamental cause because we have a concern that doing so falls into like theft because they don't have the distinction between private and personal property. So they bundle it all together into one. I say, having not actually read Rerum Novarum, maybe Leo the 13th does make that distinction, in which case Leo the 13th is very wrong. But we're not going to worry about that. We're worrying about what Leo the 14th. We're worrying about Leo the 14th.